Hi everyone, how are you today? It's my great pleasure to welcome you to our webinar. So let's see if we have anybody from the Algarve. Let's see if anybody's down there. Could you type in the chat box if you are from the Algarve? Hi Maria Delfina. And I see my friend Calvina, good to see you again. Right, so we have somebody from 𝐂𝐧𝐬𝐴, good to see you. Right, as you know, today's webinar is going to be called Making Critical Thinking Easy Peasy Lemon Squeezy. And this webinar has been put together for you with lots of love from me and my co-authors, Sylvia, who you can see on the screen, and Isabel. So a big hello from them as well. But it is my pleasure to treat you today. Now, I'm going to go straight into the webinar because I know you've had a long day. Hi, Talvina. And you probably have still the night shift to get through. So the first thing that I'd like to ask you is, let's just take a step and think about critical thinking. Now, we know that we have very, very big programs that are almost impossible to get through, right? Could you type in the chat box if you agree with me? I mean, you practically can never be sick or not have very many public holidays on the day that you teach in order to be able to complete the program. So I do think that it is very pertinent that we start off at the very beginning by asking, I mean, with all that we have to teach, with all those aprendizages and the matters which still kind of haunt us, is critical thinking really that important? Should we really cut down and make space for it when we have so many other things to teach? Now, I'd like you to type in the chat box whether you think that critical thinking really is important. And if you think so, could you please type in yes? And if you think that there are other things which are more important, then please could you type in no? So let's see how we're feeling. Matilda is saying, oh, it's quite important. Carla is giving us a big yes. Paula agrees yes as well. So it seems like I'm speaking to the converted at this moment. Olga says, of course it is. And Marcia validates that. So far, a perfect house for yeses. Are there any no's out there? Oh, Manuela doesn't say it's important. Manuela, you defend it's really important. And Carmen is even writing in capital letters. So it really seems that I am speaking to the converted. And this is really, really important because we need to think about why we are saying yes, right? And perhaps one of the reasons that makes me defend that critical thinking is a definite yes in any classroom and not just in the English classroom is the fact that it is a lifelong skill. So what does this mean? Well, it means that you really will need it throughout life in everything that you do. If you want to get a job, if you want to choose a new house or buy a new car, critical thinking is a skill that can serve you well. Hi, Lourdes, welcome. Now, it's also something that serves us well in our educational systems because critical thinking helps you become a better thinker. And if you can become a better thinker, then this also means that you can become a better learner. And as somebody's just typed in the chat box, you also become a better citizen. Because obviously, if you can learn better, you can have more of a critical opinion and you can participate more actively in society. So these are really big reasons that go just beyond the program, which is important, of course. But I think you'll agree with me that life is even more important than just a program. Now, if I say the words critical thinking, what pops up into your brain? I wonder if I can ask you to type in the chat box the first word or chunks of words that pop into your mind when I say critical thinking. So Dulce has just typed in a whole chunk, which is saying critical thinking helps us throughout life. And I totally agree, right? But what else does critical thinking bring into your mind? And this is really, really important because when we start a new learning adventure, we always start off with what our students already know. So Lucy is saying, have an opinion. Ruben is adding that we need to make decisions. Anna is saying that we need to develop imaginations. We need to have a personal opinion, as Sandra is stressing. And Anna is saying, well, it's really about awareness, isn't it? But Elsa is raising a really important point. It's not just about all these noble intentions and skills that we have, but it's also about language. In other words, you can't do critical thinking if you don't have the necessary vocabulary. Thanks, Anna Paula, for reminding us about this. Eduardo is saying that it's really teaching people how to learn how to think, how to be assertive. Nazaré is saying it's all about problem solving. So as you can see, critical thinking is a really big umbrella. Now, I've chosen 3 critical thinking definitions that I'd like to share with you today. And I'm going to ask you in a few minutes to vote for your favorite one. So let's have a look at option 1. And option 1 says that critical thinking is really about how you learn from interpreting and experiencing the world around you. Now, what does this mean? This means that critical thinking isn't an abstract skill that we have, but it is something very, very concrete. It is something that helps us in the real world. So it should be contextualized, right? Yes, Marcia, I totally agree with you that it is a very important skill. And Natalia, you're totally right. It does lead to better understanding of the world around us. So well done, girls. Now, my second quote is all about raising curiosity, appealing to our flexibility, and training us to keep an open mind. So it's all about developing tolerance within us and helping us see more than just what we believe in. And I think that this is a really powerful tool in this global world that we live in. Wouldn't you agree? Yes, Maria do Carmo, it's all about awareness raising. And I think that's really powerful. Yes, Carmo, bringing in inquiries. Now, the third quote is a really big quote, and I've chosen it because it shows us that critical thinking isn't something that you just have. Instead, it is a skill that needs to be trained. In fact, it's an intellectually disciplined process of actively involving a set of sub-skills that we'll speak in a minute, right? So, what does this mean? This means that it needs to be trained, just like any other skill. And this definition really alerts us to the fact that it needs to be brought into the curriculum and trained in class. So there you have it. Well, as Patricia is summarizing, it's really about teaching our students to think clearly, carefully, and Elia is adding to think rationally. So there you have it. 3 definitions. Which one is your favorite? Would you type in the chat box for me? Let's see who's going to win today. Is it definition 1, definition 2, or definition 3? Hi, Susanna, welcome. I hope you'll have fun with us today. Right, let's see that chat box go. So we have a vote for option 2. Hi, Rosa. Right, let's see. Does option 1 get any vote or not? Or we stick option 3 has got 2 votes already. Wow. Option 2, another vote. Option 3, another one. I wonder if anybody's going to be kind and think critically about option 1, who might be feeling very sad and vote for option 1 as well or not. Carla is voting for 3, so I see 3 seems to be winning. Fernando, thank you for voting for option 1. I'm sure that option 1 is feeling better. Right, so it seems that today, judging from our chat box, option 3 is winning. But I wonder whether you would like to see my personal favorite opinion about critical thinking. Anna is being very fair and voting for all 3. I wonder if we might call that cheating, Anna. Right, would you like to know what my favorite opinion is? If so, type in yes in the chat box and I'll gladly share it with you. Now, as you know, I'm quite passionate about critical thinking. So I chose an opinion that really reflects a little bit of what I think it's all about. Now have a look at this one. It says that critical thinking is a mode of thinking. In other words, it's a sort of a mindset. And it's a mode about thinking about any subject, any content, or any problem. In other words, about life, really, or about English. But it's all about getting the thinker to improve the quality of their thinking. Now, isn't this amazing? You can actually think better. And this means that you need to skillfully take charge of the thinking process and impose some intellectual standards on this process. Now, that sounds really difficult, but it's not that difficult because there are critical thinking superpowers that we can teach our students. And these are called the intellectual traits. Now, the intellectual traits are subcritical thinking skills. And I don't want you to be sort of overwhelmed by this because you wouldn't want to introduce them all at the same time in the classroom. And yes, Carla, you are right. They do go hand in hand with emotional intelligence. In fact, some of the critical thinking traits are all about emotional intelligence. Now, what we would try to do is ideally work on one or two of these traits in each of our lessons. So remember, it's always about baby steps. And yes, I agree with you. It is about helping our students become aware of the tools that they have to accept other people's opinions, not necessarily to share these opinions, but to accept them as they are and to see their thinking and then perhaps add on and build to that thinking, almost like an onion has different onion rings, to start creating layers around this, okay? Now, I'm going to start off with confidence in reason. And the reason why I'm going to choose this yellow balloon is that it is in fact my favorite intellectual trait. Now, I wonder if you have students like mine. And sometimes my students, when I ask them a question that starts off with, why do you think that? They stop for a minute and think, and then they answer a very profound answer, which is because. And then I'd sort of nod and spur them on and say, well, yes, because, but why? And then they might stop and think again and say, well, because. In other words, as Sita is saying, it might be a lack of confidence, but it might also be a little bit more than this. It might be a sort of gut feeling. I think I know the answer. Oh, Evelyn, I'm so relieved to see I'm not the only one who has students like these. But what's in fact happening is the student doesn't have the tools that are required to pinpoint that thinking and to give me a logical reason. And Judith is saying, well, it's sort of that just because syndrome. Now, what critical thinking allows us to do is to develop the tools to think of one concrete reason. Christine, I see that you've met the famous because as well. Now, that's confidence in reason. But another superpower is perseverance. And what does this mean? This means that when you don't understand something, do you give up or do you try again and again and again until you get it right? Do you ask your partner who's sitting next to you? Do you then ask somebody else in another group? And only at the end do you ask your teacher? Or do you take the easy way out and put up your hand, teacher, as some of them say, and if the teacher can't come to you immediately, you cross your arms and wait for better days because you don't know the answer, right? So as Anna Christina is saying, we all have students who do this. But if we teach them how to become perseverant, then Sandra, we're able to slowly get them not to give up that easily. As Louise also said, we need to train them to be fair-minded. And this means that we need to go off into that purple balloon and train empathy as well. In other words, the world is not just about me, myself, and I, but the world is also about other people who might have different opinions. They might not be the only opinions out there. And sometimes other people's opinions just validate our opinion and make us feel stronger about what we believe in. But sometimes, just sometimes, they show us that there are other ways of interpreting the world, right? Now, we also need to train courage and autonomy, because it is scary to try on your own. It is scary not to know the right answer and not to give up, right? So these are skills that we need to try and that we need to bring into the classroom. And Anna and Maria, you are totally right when you say students are not used to thinking. Because if you really look at the national exams, do they ask students to think, or do they ask students to regurgitate knowledge? And the more they regurgitate, the higher mark they get. So to be fair to students, the whole educational system has sort of pushed them in this way, really. Right, now, what happens when they have these traits? Well, that's what we're going to look at and see in the webinar. So I'd like to ask you whether you have any questions at this moment. And if you do, can you type them into the chat box? Because this is going to be the end of our theory. I'd now like to go jump into practical examples, right? So Suli, yes, open-mindedness is an essential trait. And Anna, I totally agree with you that thinking, deep level thinking with these intellectual traits really needs to be trained. Isabel, I can't resist saying hi. Hi, Isabel, welcome. Right, so I don't see any questions, which means that I'm going to ask you the most important question of my whole webinar. Are you ready for a difficult question? Could you type in the chat box if you are, so that I get the courage to ask this question? Let's see. Do I have any yeses out there or not? Let me wait just for a minute and see. Can I ask you a difficult question? There's a pretty please with a cherry on top. Maria Ghazali, thank you very much for saying yes. Oh, lots of yeses on the screen now. Okay, my question is, do you trust me enough to be your teacher today? Now, this is a really important question because I don't think that you can learn from anybody you don't trust. So in my classroom, this is the beginning of learning. Katerina, thank you so much for boosting my ego there. It's really great to see that. Right, so let the fun games begin then. I'm going to ask you today to try to break your brain in two or divide it in two. Can half of you think as a teacher? So whatever we do, think about that activity in your class. Think about how it would work, if it would work or not. Because sometimes activities need to be tweaked for our personal students, right? But could the other half of you just try to experience the activity as a student and just enjoy it for the sake of enjoying it? Do I have a thumbs up? Yeah? Right, so my first challenge today is to ask you to look at a list of words. But before we do that, let me warn you from this point on in the webinar, there is no such thing as a right or a wrong answer. In fact, all your answers are right if you validate them with a concrete reason, okay? So I will accept any answer. Yes, I'm going to say this again. I will accept any of your answers as long as you give me a concrete reason. Do we have a deal? And if you agree, could you type in the chat box, deal? And then the games will officially begin. Okay, Carla is giving me a thumbs up. Okay, that will do as well. Now, this is important because students have been trained to look for the right answer. And sometimes they're actually scared of participating because they are scared of not getting the right answer. What we want to do in a critical thinking classroom is to show them that there might be various right answers. And an answer might be right and then become wrong and then become right again. And I give you the example of Pluto. It wasn't a planet for a while. Well, actually, when I was small, it was a planet. And then suddenly it wasn't a planet. And now guess what? It's a planet again. So that proves that there are no absolute right or wrong answers. Okay, well, I must say I'm really, really pleased to get all these deals in the chat box there. Right, so let the games begin. Now, I've put a set of words on the screen. Could you just take a minute to read them? And as soon as you've read them all, could you please type in ready in the chat box? Now take your time. You don't have to be very super quick. Take your time to read through all the words. As soon as you have, remember, I'd like you to type in ready, and then I'll work with you. Yes, Philomena, I agree. It is all about discussing and at the same time accepting all answers, but then it's also about showing the students the flaws in their thinking, because sometimes there are flaws, sometimes they're not thinking 100% right. Okay, right, I see that you're ready. Now, my challenge today is, could you help me organize these words? I mean, they look very nice on the screen, but they haven't really been organized. They're there in a random order. So I wonder whether we could find links between words. Now, let me give you an example to get you going. Do you see the word fashion? Can anybody help me find any other words that I could group together with fashion? Now, remember, I don't just want the answer. I want the reason that makes you give me that answer. So no matter what answer you give me now, I'm always going to ask you, what makes you say that? And that's a really important question. So I totally agree with Ligia and Vanda and Encarnação about the word trendy. But ladies, what makes you say trendy? I also agree. Oh, Elder, trendy is a style of fashion. Okay, so I'll group fashion and trendy. Now, Ruben is saying wardrobe. Ruben, I will accept your answer if you can give me a reason for that. So why wardrobe? Now, Maria Alzina is saying somebody creates fashion. So perhaps we could have a fashion designer there as well, right? Creations. So Fernando's saying baggy and trendy and body and wardrobe. But Fernando, what makes you say this? And this question is really, really important. This is the question that's going to train that intellectual trait, which is called confidence in reason, that we looked at a few minutes ago. In other words, why? This is the because. And as Anna is saying, well, because baggy clothes aren't fashionable. And that's a fantastic reason. Right, so we've chosen one group, which is fashion. I wonder whether you could come up with another group with my set of words, right? Elena is giving us a good reason why we should choose trendy. So fashion can or not be trendy, yes. Or pop stars as they are teenage idols. Oh, I like that. Wardrobe as it is a piece of furniture where we put all our fashionable clothes in. Right, Christina, environment. So let's accept Christina's suggestions. Can anybody help me find some words which are related to environment? Elizabeth, are you saying music? Could you find some more words that we could link up to music? So Paula is saying environment and healthy eating. Yes, making the best of the planet's resources. Do you see how we can play around with so many ideas if we just train the students to think critically? Wow, have a look at this word. Natalia is saying vegans, and vegans don't eat animals. So we're getting lots of vocabulary, we're getting lots of language as we are looking at the different layers of thinking. Now, all this is good and well, but we need to make this thinking visible for students, or it might become quite confusing. Because let me tell you a secret, they aren't as good as you are. They don't remember all these words as well as you are, as well as you can. So I'd like to share a tool that I absolutely adore and that helps me make this thinking clear for students. It's called Poplet, and I'll put up the link in a minute on the screen for you. And what Poplet allows you to do is just to do brainstorming. but to do a tweaked version of brainstorming. Now, I'm going to zoom in so you can see what I mean. Now, if you have a look, you'll see that I can color code my poplets, as students are very visual learners. I can also add images to my poplets so that students can link an image with a word and understand the meaning of that word. But if you have a look at my lyrics, you see that I can include a link to a web page or even a video. So it is, as Christina is saying, a fantastic tool that students can use. It's also very user-friendly. Basically, you just click on the screen and you get a little bubble, and then you can create the links and you can move them around. So it's absolutely perfect for critical thinking. And you'll find that graphic organizers in general are fantastic tools to make our students think. So you could ask them to go online and for homework to make a poplet, or you could divide them in a breakout room now as we're doing our online teaching and get them to make a poplet per group. And then you could get the students to show or project their screens in Teams or in Classroom if you're using that. And you could compare and contrast all these different ways of organizing my words. Now, would you like to know a secret? You know us teachers, well, we always have agendas. And I've also got an agenda today. But before I tell you about my agenda, let me just comment on Vena's post. Vena, I've also used Padlet lots of times, but Padlet is a little different to Poplet because with Poplet, you can actually move those ideas around. Whereas Padlet, sometimes you have a wall, which is not as user-friendly to relate ideas and to change them very, very easily. Give it a try because I think that you'll fall in love with this tool, right? Okay, so we're going to be reading a text today, and my text has all these words that you just so kindly organized for me. So you know what I'm going to ask you, don't you? What do you think that the text we are going to read today is going to be about? I wonder if you could stop and think in the chat box. What might this text be about? Remember, we saw words about the environment. We saw words about pop music. We saw words about fashion. Oh, I think it's going to be an interesting text. Maria Clara, I love your answer. Teens. What makes you say that? Remember that critical thinking question, right? Elena, I didn't know about this app either until I did some research, but it's a fantastic app. Give it a try. Oh, 𝐂𝐧𝐬𝐴, you're saying the biography of a singer. Now, that's an amazing idea. How did you know that? Would you type in the chat box? Remember to always ask these 2 follow-up questions to help your students develop the intellectual traits. How do you know that? What makes you say that? If you like, you could add in, could you please give me an example so I can understand what you're thinking or what you mean? Right, now Anna is saying teens love music. Ruben is now saying music because every word here is related to it, okay? So as you can see, we're now moving into a different level of thinking. We're thinking about the text even before we've started reading the text. Now, I am asking you to do something which is really intellectually advanced and which might be more difficult than the language that students actually have. So we need to come back down to Teacher Earth, and we need to remember that sometimes we need to give children the chunks of language that they need to be able to speak about their thinking. So I might stop and first introduce these language functions before I actually did these tasks with the students. I didn't do that with you today because, well, you're fantastic. You know all this language. You can use it naturally, as anybody who reads the chat box can see. But expressions like perhaps it's about, or it could be about, but then again, it might be about. It's also possible that would be very, very useful expressions for the language classroom. And don't forget to teach them this big expression, which develops confidence in reason. The reason I say this is that or if you prefer, the reason I defend this is because. This is a really important sentence that needs to be practiced a little bit more in the classroom. Now, we're going to be reading a text, and our text today is about this lady, Billie Eilish. And I wonder if you've ever heard of her. Have you heard of her before? And if you have, could you please type in the chat box what you know about this lady? I see Sita's having quite a emotional reaction here, right? So yes, Billie Eilish. Oh yes, this teacher is a cool teacher who knows what's on the charts. Right, so do you know anything about Billie? And if you do, could you please type in the chat box so we can share what we know? Claudia is saying that this young lady is a singer. Actually, Claudia, she's a very rich singer, if you know what I mean. Elsa is saying she's not only a singer, but she's actually controversial. Paula, you're cool. You know that she's won lots of Grammys. Isabel knows that she's famous. Wow, I don't know who this message 70 is, but you know something that's really cool. She was homeschooled. Isabel knows that she's against social media. Lysia's obviously heard her sing because she knows that she's very talented. Right, all our teens know her. And yes, she does write her own songs. Isn't it amazing what you know about Billie Eilish? Now, what we want to do in the critical thinking classroom is to organize this thinking and to point out this thinking to students. And one wonderful way of doing this is by using a KWL chart. I wonder whether you've heard of a KWL chart before. If you have, could you please type in yes in the chat box, and I'll just go a little bit quicker in the webinar. And if you haven't, could you type in no, and I'll stop and explain it to you. Now, a KWL chart is a really, really useful tool that could be used with anything in the classroom. Today, I've used it to speak about Billie Eilish, but you could use it to speak about the present perfect. And we all know how much George Clooney and I love the present perfect, don't we now? Right, now what a KWL chart allows you to do is to start off with what the students know, just as we started off with today. So what do we know about Billie? Then we can move on into the second column. What would we like to know about her? And at the beginning of the lesson, we only fill in the first two columns. We leave the third column until the end of the lesson. So that's what we're going to do today. Right, now today we're going to find out a little bit more about her, and I'm going to invite you to read a text, but I'm going to let you choose how you'd like to do this. Would you like to read the text on your own? Or would you like me to read the text for you? What would you prefer today? It's really important to give children the power of choice. It makes them feel empowered and involved in their learning, right? So sometimes a little thing like this, would you like to read your own text or would you like me to read it for you, could be something to grab children's attention for another 5 or 10 minutes. Okay, your wish is my command, so I will read this for you. Right, are you ready? Could you give me a thumbs up if you're ready to concentrate with me? Okay, Jeremina is saying perhaps you could read it for us. Yes, of course I could. Right, so the text today is called A Star with Style. And if you would like to read the text along with me, then feel free to do that as well. Are you ready? Let's go then. Billie Eilish Pirate Bars O'Connell, known simply as Billie Eilish, is an American singer and songwriter who was born in California and began singing at a young age. But Billie isn't your regular popular star. Everything about this girl is unique, from her distinctive voice and moving lyrics to her eating habits and her sense of fashion. Billie chooses her wardrobe as if she were on stage all the time. She mixes and matches cheap clothes with trendy fashion designer creations. She's also an unconditional fan of flashy colors, the type that stay in your memory long after you've seen them. I always try to dress creatively. I'll wear clothes in a way that you don't see in a regular shop or on the street. And I'll wear lots of accessories too, just for the fun of it, says Billy. But she has a secret reason for getting dressed like this. She explains that she wears oversized clothes because she doesn't want people to criticize her body. In fact, she wants to be famous for her voice rather than her body. She wants people to focus on her talent to sing and write songs that are powerful and make a difference in any teen's life. Did you know that Billy decided to become a vegan and change her lifestyle and diet even before she went to secondary school? She felt that this was her way of protecting the environment and all those defenseless animals out there. She says that she wants to show her fans that you can still eat your favorite dessert and look after your sweet tooth using vegan ingredients. After all, chocolate chip cookies are too difficult to resist. Wouldn't you agree? Glory, glory, this is the end of Billie Eilish's story for today. Or is it the beginning? Now, when we do a text like this in class, oh, thank you for the thumbs up. I did notice I made a few mistakes as I was reading this print in fine letters. So you're being very, very kind to me today. Thank you, guys. Right, now when we have a text like this in class, what is the most traditional type of activity that we do after we've read the text? Would you type in the chat box, please, what this kind of activity would be? So, you know, when we have texts like this, what do we do next with the students? Sorry, I'm choking on my own excitement here. Right, so what kind of activity would we do next? And I mean, many of these activities we see in course books, to be fair, right? Okay, washing hands. Yes, Christina, answering questions about the text. And we all know why we have to do this. I mean, it's a fantastic way of checking whether students have understood the language in the text. But let's stop and think for a minute. Lurch, I totally agree with you. Reading comprehension questions, right? But in your opinion, how do these types of exercises help students develop their critical thinking skills? I mean, we all agree that they develop their language skills, but we started off by saying that it's important to develop critical thinking as it's a lifelong skill. So these question and answer, these synonyms, these completing the charts, these reading comprehension questions that you're all typing in the chat box, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much do you think they develop students' critical thinking skills? Oh, Claire is saying it's boring for them, to make matters worse. Isabel is saying just a scale of 3. So things aren't looking very, very good for these type of activities, are there now? And so basically, we're used to seeing these activities in books, and well, if we're very honest, we have to admit that they probably don't even develop critical thinking skills on a scale of 5. So I see lots of 2s, 3s, Fernando 1s. Christina's feeling kind today, so she's saying 4. So then the question to ask is, these activities are important. I mean, we do need to develop their comprehension skills, but how could we tweak the activity? How could we add in an extra activity to get the children thinking, to get them to compare and contrast, to get them to read and reread and evaluate what they're thinking? Well, let me show you what I like to do with my students. Instead of giving them the questions after that first reading for gist, when I want them to read for detail, I turn the tables. And basically what I do is I stop putting students in this role of receivers of knowledge and put them in the role of creators of knowledge. So what I ask them to do then is to write the questions that they would ask me to ask the next turma. And they're all very, very excited about that. You know, that element of competition, which turma is going to ask the best questions. Now, to be honest, in the beginning, some of the weaker students ask simple questions like, what is her name? But gradually, as we start developing these critical thinking skills, they move on to more detailed questions like, what does this text make you think of? How does this text make you feel? Do you think that the person is being objective? What is the purpose of this text? Who was this text written for? And this is critical thinking in full force. So start off with baby steps. It doesn't matter whether they start off with content questions. Gradually introduce another question which brings in this critical thinking, and point out when somebody asks that kind of question. Write it on the board, examine it with students, and then ask, what made you think of this question? How did you come up with this idea? To make their thinking visible to weaker students, so that weaker students know how to imitate this kind of thinking. Now, Isabel, it's true that not every student can do it, but if we make the thinking process visible, slowly they'll start understanding how to do it. If a student says, well, first I read the text, and then I thought about what other people would choose, and then I thought about, the student starts to understand a sort of recipe for thinking critically. And you can even write that on the board for the students to then try out in another critical thinking text. And when it comes to vocabulary, we can do all these synonym and antonym exercises that you were suggesting just now. But after we've done that, yes, Suj, we can take baby steps and do a similar sort of activity for vocabulary. And here you can see I've introduced a different vocabulary organizer. So what I've asked the students to do is then to go back and reread the text, to choose 2 or 3 words that they already knew and felt comfortable with. In other words, to celebrate the English that they already know, but then to move on and to choose 2 or 3 words that are new for me. So these might be new, perhaps they're still a bit threatening, perhaps I don't know how to spell them, or I don't know exactly what they mean. And then finally to choose between 3 and 5 words that I like and actually want to use again. So what am I doing? I'm comparing and contrasting. Now, Anna is saying that you quite agree with Anna Prater. And I'm sorry, Anna, the chat box is flying by so quickly that I wasn't able to see what Anna said. So perhaps you can type in the chat box again and I can see that. Right, now, oh, Elena, you're right. Many parents do want us to follow the course book. But by introducing these follow-up activities, you are following the course book and you're just adding another tweak. You're not changing the course book. You're still doing all those questions, but then you're asking students to go back and think. And of course, it is easier for them to do the true or false exercises before, because for them to be able to interpret the text critically, they need to understand it. So all those exercises are in fact very, very pertinent, okay? Right, Anna, I'm glad that you like the vocabulary organizer, and perhaps you might want to start off with this and then slowly introduce the other graphic organizers that I'm going to show you. Remember, it's all about baby steps. It's all about knowing your students and what they can handle and doing it slowly. Rome wasn't built in a day, and that means you don't need to train them to be critical thinkers in a day. But slowly, after over the course of your lessons, you can train them to do these. Yes, Pedro, these are authentic activities because I go into the classroom and try them with my students, and so does Sylvia and Isabel before we present them to you, because we know that you don't have a lot of time and you need to do activities that actually work. Now, I'd like us to sort of have a little break here and to think about the reason why we learn a language. And sometimes we get so caught up in teaching the program that we forget about this. Why do we learn a language in the first place? Do we learn a language to pass an exam, would you say? Or perhaps to do very well in a test? Or perhaps to have a conversation with George Clooney about the present perfect? What is it that makes us want to learn a language? And also just hit the nail on the head there by saying, We do it to communicate what we know, what we feel, to communicate our ideas to others, perhaps even to communicate our culture to others, our interests to others. And so I would defend that whenever possible, we should bring this into the classroom. And a nice follow-up activity that you could do with this text is then to ask the students to imagine that we were inviting Billie Eilish over to our house. And what we want to do is that we want to make the perfect menu for this vegan pop star who writes the most amazing songs and looks a little goofy. But we want to make the perfect menu for her that would showcase our culture to her. And so now the students have to work together to come up with the perfect starter with the ingredients that we have, and the perfect beverage, and the perfect main course, and the perfect dessert. So as Philomena is saying, what we're actually doing is getting the children to share ideas. And do you remember those intellectual traits that we looked at? Empathy, confidence in reason, perseverance. This is what we're doing, and we're doing it to communicate, as Dina says. Now, what we could do is introduce another graphic organizer to help them do this, because this is some quite profound thinking. And what we could do now is use a Venn diagram. And a Venn diagram allows us to compare and contrast ideas. In other words, what do we like to eat, and what do we think that Billy would like to eat? And that middle ground is what we have in common. And so we're looking at the world through different perspectives, which is exactly what critical thinking is all about. Now, you don't need to be photocopying all these resources. You don't even need to be adding anything else to your textbook, because you can get the students just to draw these two circles in their notebook and to complete the task with the ideas in the course book. Now, if you really want to take this further, then you can dream big. And you know me, I've been known to be called a dreamer. So why not transfer this into a DAC project? Why not create a menu that showcases our region to all the tourists who come to visit Portugal? And COVID isn't going to stay here forever, so they'll be back and they'll want to eat yummy food in our restaurants. And then perhaps we can involve other subjects to make this a meaningful activity. And Portuguese and Spanish can help translate these menus. And we can actually take these menus to our local restaurants and help them. Science can help us think of a healthy menu. 𝐻𝐾𝐧𝐬𝐴 𝐵 can make a really beautiful menu. So students can see that their thinking and their learning can actually have a very, very big impact on society, especially if you pair up with a local restaurant. So that's a simple activity that you can do that can actually take this a step further. Now, every critical thinking lesson starts off by thinking about learning and ends off by evaluating that learning. So as our time together is drawing to a close, it seems fitting that I come back to our KWL chart and invite you to think about today's critical thinking lesson, and now to come into that third column and to write just one or two things that you learned today, right? So I'd like you, please, to type in the chat box what you learned about the thinking. And as you do that, I'm just going to answer Maria Souza's question, which was in the Venn diagram, there were two circles. And in that intersection, Maria, I would write what is common. So the example I gave you was the things that I like to eat, and then the things that I think Billy likes to eat. So in common, we'd write in the intersecting section, we'd write the things that I think would be common. So she's a vegan, she might like to eat wonderful vegetables and very fresh fruit, or anything that wasn't meat related, right? Hopefully that answers your question, Maria. If you still have a question, please can you type in the chat box. Right, so as you've been doing, Christina, I could kiss you now because you've just said what I strongly believe in. Critical thinking, amazing. critical thinking is amazing. And you know what? It's not that difficult to implement. All we have to do is take baby steps and tweak the activities that we're already doing in the classroom. So you know what I'm going to say next, don't you? Glory, glory. This is the end of our critical thinking story. But luckily, we'll be back soon with more news. So I'd like to say a big, big thank you to everybody who's participated in the webinar today. It's been a great pleasure to have you online with me. Not quite as good as being with you in person, but better than not being with you at all. And I'd also like to tell you that I have a little something for you. So I'd like to share my PowerPoint with you, and I'll be asking Portiritora to email it to you. But because I love you so much, and because I thought you might like this lesson, I've prepared a little fichinha with the activities today that is ready for you to photocopy for your students. Feel free to make any tweaks that you would like to, because I will send it to you in a Word format so you can change any ideas that might be a little too difficult or a little too easy for your students, depending on the level that you are teaching. So a very, very big hug. I'd like to thank Portiritora for helping us be with you during this difficult time. And I'd also ask you to stay safe, because our students need you now more than ever before. Sometimes you're all they have to keep them grounded to the real world and to life before all of this confusion. Right, so a very, very big hug. Anna, I'm glad that you like the fichinhas. You'll be receiving this in a day or two time. Portiritora will send you a little package with your participation certificate, my PowerPoint, and the fichinha. If you don't get it, please look in your spam box, because sometimes things go into your spam box. They have been sent, but you haven't seen them. And if you have any problems, remember that you can always contact Espaço de Professor, and they will gladly answer your queries and solve any problem that you have. So time for me to love you and leave you and say a very, very big thank you, send you a virtual hug, and see you later, alligator. Bye-bye, everyone. Keep safe.